Question 1. Which literary movement emphasized the importance of imagination, emotion, and nature, and emerged in the late 18th century? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Victorianism. D. Modernism. Answer: A. Romanticism. Question 2. In which literary movement did writers explore the inner workings of the human mind, often using stream of consciousness, and reject traditional narrative structures? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Modernism. D. Gothic. Answer: C. Modernism. Question 3. Which literary movement, prevalent in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, focused on social issues, industrialization, and the impact of technology on society? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Victorianism. D. Naturalism. Answer: B. Realism. Question 4. Which literary movement, characterized by a focus on the supernatural, mysterious, and the macabre, gained popularity in the 18th and 19th centuries? A. Gothic. B. Romanticism. C. Realism. D. Transcendentalism. Answer: A. Gothic. Question 5. Which literary movement, associated with the mid to late 19th century, emphasized moral and social values, as well as a strict adherence to conventional forms? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Victorianism. D. Transcendentalism. Answer: C. Victorianism. Question 6. Which literary movement, emerging in the 1950s and 1960s, was characterized by a focus on alienation, disillusionment, and a rejection of traditional values? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Modernism. D. Postmodernism. Answer: D. Postmodernism. Question 7. Which literary movement, associated with the early 20th century, sought to capture the essence of human experience through fragmented and impressionistic writing? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Modernism. D. Gothic. Answer: C. Modernism. Question 8. Which literary movement, prevalent in the 17th century, was characterized by wit, intellectual complexity, and a focus on social satire? A. Renaissance. B. Neoclassicism. C. Metaphysical poetry. D. Restoration comedy. Answer: C. Metaphysical poetry. Question 9. Which literary movement, associated with the 17th and 18th centuries, emphasized reason, order, and classical influences? A. Renaissance. B. Neoclassicism. C. Romanticism. D. Transcendentalism. Answer: B. Neoclassicism. Question 10. In which literary movement did writers like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound reject traditional forms, embrace free verse, and experiment with language and structure? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Modernism. D. Victorianism. Answer: C. Modernism. Question 11. Which literary movement, often associated with the 18th century, emphasized reason, skepticism, and a focus on scientific inquiry? A. Enlightenment. B. Neoclassicism. C. Romanticism. D. Victorianism. Answer: A. Enlightenment. Question 12. In which literary movement did writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway explore the disillusionment and loss of meaning following World War I? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Modernism. D. Postcolonialism. Answer: C. Modernism. Question 13. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, focused on the experiences of African Americans and sought to challenge racial inequality? A. Harlem Renaissance. B. Surrealism. C. Absurdism. D. Postcolonialism. Answer: A. Harlem Renaissance. Question 14. Which literary movement, associated with the 1960s and 1970s, focused on the experiences and perspectives of women, challenging traditional gender roles? A. Feminism. B. Postmodernism. C. Beat Generation. D. Surrealism. Answer: A. Feminism. Question 15. In which literary movement did writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg rebel against societal norms, exploring themes of spontaneity and anti-establishment values? A. Beat Generation. B. Romanticism. C. Realism. D. Postmodernism. Answer. A. Beat Generation. Question 16. Which literary movement, associated with the 19th century, focused on the idea of individual intuition, the inherent goodness of people, and the transcendence of the self? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Naturalism. D. Victorianism. Answer. A. Romanticism. Question 17. In which literary movement did authors like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce experiment with narrative techniques and explore the inner thoughts and consciousness of characters? A. Realism. B. Modernism. C. Romanticism. D. Naturalism. Answer. B. Modernism. Question 18. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, was characterized by a rejection of traditional forms and an exploration of the absurdity of human existence? A. Surrealism. B. Absurdism. C. Postcolonialism. D. Harlem Renaissance. Answer. B. Absurdism. Question 19. In which literary movement did writers like George Orwell and Aldous Huxley explore dystopian themes, reflecting on the dangers of totalitarianism and loss of individual freedoms? A. Modernism. B. Romanticism. C. Postmodernism. D. Dystopian literature. Answer. D. Dystopian literature. Question 20. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, was characterized by a skepticism towards grand narratives, a focus on language, and a playfulness with form? A. Postmodernism. B. Romanticism. C. Realism. D. Victorianism. Answer. A. Postmodernism. Question 21. Which literary movement, prevalent in the 17th century, was marked by a focus on reason, wit, and intellectual complexity, with poets like John Donne and Andrew Marvell? A. Enlightenment. B. Metaphysical poetry. C. Neoclassicism. D. Renaissance. Answer. B. Metaphysical poetry. Question 22. In which literary movement did authors like Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters explore themes of social class, marriage, and morality in the 19th century? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Victorianism. D. Transcendentalism. Answer. C. Victorianism. Question 23. Which literary movement, associated with the early 20th century, was characterized by a rejection of traditional norms, experimentation with language, and a focus on the subconscious? A. Surrealism. B. Romanticism. C. Modernism. D. Beat Generation. Answer. C. Modernism. Question 24. In which literary movement did writers like Salman Rushdie and Chinua Achebe explore the impact of colonialism and post-colonial identity? A. Postmodernism. B. Postcolonialism. C. Realism. D. Absurdism. Answer. B. Postcolonialism. Question 25. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, was characterized by a rejection of traditional forms, an exploration of popular culture, and a focus on the fragmented nature of reality? A. Surrealism. B. Postmodernism. C. Romanticism. D. Naturalism. Answer. B. Postmodernism. Question 26. Which literary movement, emerging in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, focused on depicting life as it is, often emphasizing the mundane and everyday experiences? A. Realism. B. Romanticism. C. Naturalism. D. Victorianism. Answer. A. Realism. Question 27. In which literary movement did writers like William Faulkner and Eudora Welty explore the complexities of Southern society, often delving into issues of race and class? A. Southern Gothic. B. Harlem Renaissance. C. Transcendentalism. D. Beat Generation. Answer. A. Southern Gothic. Question 28. Which literary movement, associated with the 18th century, emphasized reason, scientific inquiry, and a rejection of superstition? A. Enlightenment. B. Romanticism. C. Neoclassicism. D. Gothic. Answer. A. Enlightenment. Question 29. In which literary movement did writers like W.B. Yeats and T.S. Eliot explore themes of disillusionment and the impact of war? A. Modernism. B. Romanticism. C. Realism. D. Victorianism. Answer: A. Modernism. Question 30. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, focused on the experiences of the working class and the impact of industrialization? A. Beat Generation. B. Social Realism. C. Harlem Renaissance. D. Surrealism. Answer: B. Social Realism. Question 31. Which literary movement, emerging in the 1950s and 1960s, was characterized by a rejection of traditional narrative structures, a focus on subjectivity, and a blending of genres? A. Postmodernism. B. Surrealism. C. Magical realism. D. Absurdism. Answer: A. Postmodernism. Question 32. In which literary movement did authors like Mary Shelley and Edgar Allan Poe explore themes of the supernatural, horror, and the macabre? A. Gothic. B. Romanticism. C. Realism. D. Naturalism. Answer: A. Gothic. Question 33. Which literary movement, associated with the late 19th century, portrayed life as a deterministic struggle, often depicting characters caught in the forces of their environment? A. Realism. B. Romanticism. C. Naturalism. D. Victorianism. Answer: C. Naturalism. Question 34. In which literary movement did writers like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston explore the African American experience, culture, and folklore? A. Harlem Renaissance. B. Social Realism. C. Beat Generation. D. Southern Gothic. Answer: A. Harlem Renaissance. Question 35. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, was characterized by a rejection of traditional norms, a focus on the unconscious, and a belief in the power of dreams? A. Surrealism. B. Absurdism. C. Romanticism. D. Modernism. Answer: A. Surrealism. Question 36. Which literary movement, associated with the late 16th and early 17th centuries, is characterized by elaborate language, wit, and exploration of complex themes often centered around love and metaphysical concerns? A. Renaissance. B. Neoclassicism. C. Romanticism. D. Enlightenment. Answer: A. Renaissance. Question 37. In which literary movement did poets like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth emphasize a connection to nature, individualism, and the expression of deep emotions? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Naturalism. D. Victorianism. Answer: A. Romanticism. Question 38. Which literary movement, emerging in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, emphasized reason, order, and clarity, drawing inspiration from classical works? A. Enlightenment. B. Neoclassicism. C. Romanticism. D. Gothic. Answer: B. Neoclassicism. Question 39. In which literary movement did writers like Charles Dickens and George Eliot explore the societal changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution and its impact on the working class? A. Victorianism. B. Realism. C. Romanticism. D. Modernism. Answer: A. Victorianism. Question 40. Which literary movement, associated with the early 18th century, satirized societal norms, often using humor to criticize and expose the vices of individuals and institutions? A. Restoration comedy. B. Renaissance. C. Enlightenment. D. Neoclassicism. Answer: A. Restoration comedy. Question 41. Which literary movement, associated with the early 20th century, was characterized by a rejection of conventional narrative techniques, a focus on subjective experiences, and an exploration of the impact of World War I? A. Imagism. B. Modernism. C. Harlem Renaissance. D. Naturalism. Answer: B. Modernism. Question 42. In which literary movement did writers like Jane Austen and Sir Walter Scott explore themes of individualism, emotion, and the impact of social change in the late 18th and early 19th centuries? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Victorianism. D. Gothic. Answer: A. Romanticism. Question 43. Which literary movement, associated with the late 18th century, was characterized by an emphasis on reason, individual rights, and a rejection of absolute monarchy? A. Romanticism. B. Gothic. C. Enlightenment. D. Neoclassicism. Answer: C. Enlightenment. Question 44. In which literary movement did writers like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf experiment with narrative techniques, symbolism, and psychological insights into characters? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Modernism. D. Naturalism. Answer: C. Modernism. Question 45. Which literary movement, associated with the 19th and early 20th centuries, emphasized the portrayal of everyday life, often focusing on the middle class and their struggles? A. Romanticism. B. Realism. C. Victorianism. D. Naturalism. Answer: B. Realism. Question 46. Which literary movement, associated with the late 19th and early 20th centuries, focused on portraying the dark and mysterious aspects of human nature, often featuring supernatural elements? A. Gothic. B. Romanticism. C. Realism. D. Symbolism. Answer: A. Gothic. Question 47. In which literary movement did writers like William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor explore the complexities of the southern United States, often addressing themes of racism and social issues? A. Southern Gothic. B. Harlem Renaissance. C. Transcendentalism. D. Realism. Answer: A. Southern Gothic. Question 48. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, featured works that challenged traditional conventions and often reflected the disillusionment following World War II? A. Beat Generation. B. Surrealism. C. Absurdism. D. Harlem Renaissance. Answer: A. Beat Generation. Question 49. In which literary movement did writers like H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe explore themes of horror, the supernatural, and the mysterious? A. Gothic. B. Romanticism. C. Realism. D. Dark Romanticism. Answer: D. Dark Romanticism. Question 50. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, was characterized by a focus on cultural diversity, hybridity, and the blending of different literary traditions? A. Postcolonialism. B. Magical realism. C. Postmodernism. D. Harlem Renaissance. Answer: B. Magical realism. Question 51. In which literary movement did authors like J.D. Salinger and Jack Kerouac rebel against societal norms, explore the experiences of the Beat Generation, and reject materialism? A. Beat Generation. B. Postmodernism. C. Magical realism. D. Southern Gothic. Answer: A. Beat Generation. Question 52. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, was characterized by a rejection of traditional structures, a focus on the unconscious mind, and the exploration of the absurdity of human existence? A. Surrealism. B. Absurdism. C. Postcolonialism. D. Beat Generation. Answer: B. Absurdism. Question 53. In which literary movement did writers like Salman Rushdie and Gabriel Garcia Marquez incorporate magical elements into their works while addressing social and political issues? A. Postcolonialism. B. Magical realism. C. Postmodernism. D. Absurdism. Answer: B. Magical realism. Question 54. Which literary movement, associated with the latter half of the 20th century, was characterized by a skepticism toward grand narratives, a focus on language, and a playfulness with form? A. Postmodernism. B. Absurdism. C. Magical realism. D. Surrealism. Answer: A. Postmodernism. Question 55. In which literary movement did writers like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker explore themes of race, gender, and identity in the context of African American experiences? A. Harlem Renaissance. B. Postmodernism. C. Feminism. D. Magical realism. Answer: C. Feminism. Question 56. Which literary movement, associated with the latter half of the 20th century, challenged traditional gender roles, addressed women's issues, and sought to redefine women's roles in society? A. Feminism. B. Beat generation. C. Magical realism. D. Postcolonialism. Answer. A. Feminism. Question 57. In which literary movement did authors like Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller use satire and absurdity to critique war, bureaucracy, and societal norms? A. Surrealism. B. Absurdism. C. Postmodernism. D. Magical realism. Answer. C. Postmodernism. Question 58. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, sought to capture the experiences of African Americans, celebrating their cultural contributions and addressing racial inequalities? A. Harlem Renaissance. B. Feminism. C. Beat generation. D. Magical realism. Answer. A. Harlem Renaissance. Question 59. In which literary movement did authors like Salman Rushdie and Chinua Achebe explore the impact of colonialism, cultural identity, and post-colonial experiences? A. Postcolonialism. B. Magical realism. C. Absurdism. D. Surrealism. Answer. A. Postcolonialism. Question 60. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, was characterized by a blending of different cultural and literary traditions, often incorporating elements of the fantastic into everyday life? A. Magical realism. B. Postmodernism. C. Surrealism. D. Feminism. Answer. A. Magical realism. Question 61. In which literary movement did writers like Ronald Furbank and Ivy Compton Burnett experiment with language and narrative style, often portraying the absurdities of society? A. Imagism. B. Decadence. C. Oulipo. D. Vorticism. Answer. B. Decadence. Question 62. Which literary movement, associated with the late 19th and early 20th centuries, focused on the rejection of conventional norms, the use of humor, and an emphasis on the irrational and the bizarre? A. Dadaism. B. Sturm und Drang. C. Symbolism. D. Bloomsbury Group. Answer. A. Dadaism. Question 63. In which literary movement did poets like E. Cummings and Gertrude Stein experiment with language, form, and syntax, often challenging traditional grammatical structures? A. Concrete poetry. B. Language poetry. C. Vorticism. D. Futurism. Answer. A. Concrete poetry. Question 64. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, focused on creating works that were intentionally difficult, challenging, and often requiring active reader participation? A. Oulipo. B. Sturm und Drang. C. Magical realism. D. New formalism. Answer. A. Oulipo. Question 65. In which literary movement did authors like Wyndham Lewis and Ezra Pound emphasize the importance of the visual arts and modern technology in literature? A. Vorticism. B. Bloomsbury Group. C. Symbolism. D. Sturm und Drang. Answer. A. Vorticism. Question 66. Which literary movement, associated with the 1960s, involved poets who rejected traditional language and explored the use of everyday language, often incorporating pop culture references? A. Language poetry. B. Black Mountain Poets. C. Flarf poetry. D. The New York School. Answer. C. Flarf poetry. Question 67. In which literary movement did writers like William S. Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg explore unconventional narrative structures and themes related to drug culture and unconventional lifestyles? A. The New York School. B. Black Mountain Poets. C. Beat Generation. D. Language Poetry. Answer. C. Beat Generation. Question 68. Which literary movement, associated with the late 19th and early 20th centuries, involved writers who rejected realism and embraced the fantastical, often exploring dreams and the subconscious? A. Decadence. B. Symbolism. C. Vorticism. D. Oulipo. Answer. B. Symbolism. Question 69. In which literary movement did writers like Angela Carter and Salman Rushdie explore magical and fantastical elements, often incorporating folklore and myth into their works? A. Magical realism. B. New formalism. C. Sturm und Drang. D. Flarf poetry. Answer. A. Magical realism. Question 70. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, involved poets who rejected traditional forms and structures, often focusing on the materiality of language in the process of writing? A. Language poetry. B. Concrete poetry. C. Oulipo. D. The Black Arts Movement. Answer. A. Language poetry. More. ChatGPT. Certainly. Here are additional questions about lesser-known literary movements in English literature. Question 71. In which literary movement did writers like Ronald Duncan and Henry Treece experiment with form and language, often incorporating historical and mythological themes? A. Apocalyptic poetry. B. Angry Young Men. C. Group 47. D. Kitchen sink realism. Answer. A. Apocalyptic poetry. Question 72. Which literary movement, associated with the 1940s and 1950s, involved British writers who expressed disillusionment with post-World War II society and explored existential themes? A. Apocalyptic poetry. B. Angry Young Men. C. Kitchen sink realism. D. Group 47. Answer. B. Angry Young Men. Question 73. In which literary movement did poets like W. H. Auden and Christopher Sherwood explore sociopolitical themes, often expressing their concerns about the state of the world during the 1930s? A. Apocalyptic poetry. B. Angry Young Men. C. Imagism. D. The Black Arts Movement. Answer. A. Apocalyptic poetry. Question 74. Which literary movement, associated with the 1950s and 1960s, involved German writers who rejected traditional narrative structures and experimented with avant-garde techniques? A. Apocalyptic poetry. B. Angry Young Men. C. Group 47. D. Kitchen sink realism. Answer. C. Group 47. Question 75. In which literary movement did writers like John Brain and Alan Sillitoe depict the struggles of working-class individuals in post-World War II Britain? A. Apocalyptic poetry. B. Angry Young Men. C. Group 47. D. Kitchen sink realism. Answer. D. Kitchen sink realism. Question 76. Which literary movement, associated with the 18th century, was characterized by satire, parody, and a rejection of highbrow literary conventions in favor of more accessible, everyday language? A. Augustan poetry. B. Grub Street poetry. C. Cockney School. D. Rhymers Club. Answer. B. Grub Street poetry. Question 77. In which literary movement did poets like John Davidson and William Ernest Henley reject the sentimentality of the Victorian era, opting for more robust and realistic expressions? A. Augustan poetry. B. Grub Street poetry. C. Imagism. D. Rhymers Club. Answer. C. Imagism. Question 78. Which literary movement, associated with the late 19th and early 20th centuries, involved poets like Arthur Symons and Ernest Dowson who were influenced by French symbolism and focused on aestheticism and the decadent? A. Aestheticism. B. Rhymers Club. C. Symbolism. D. Cockney School. Answer. B. Rhymers Club. Question 79. In which literary movement did poets like Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Christina Rossetti emphasize the connection between visual art and poetry, often expressing themes of sensuality and medievalism? A. Aestheticism. B. Rhymers Club. C. Symbolism. D. Augustan poetry. Answer. A. Aestheticism. Question 80. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, involved poets who embraced colloquial language and celebrated the vernacular, often focusing on the speech patterns of everyday people? A. Cockney School. B. The Movement. C. Grub Street poetry. D. Augustan poetry. Answer. B. The Movement. Question 81. Which literary movement, associated with the late 18th century, emphasized reason, individual rights, and a rejection of absolute monarchy, influencing political thought and literature? A. Romanticism. B. Enlightenment. C. Victorianism. D. Realism. Answer. B. Enlightenment. Question 82. In which literary movement did poets like William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge focus on the power of imagination, emotion, and a connection to nature? A. Romanticism. B. Enlightenment. C. Victorianism. D. Realism. Answer. A. Romanticism. Question 83. Which literary movement, associated with the late 19th century, reflected the social and moral concerns of the time, often addressing the impact of industrialization and technological advancements? A. Romanticism. B. Enlightenment. C. Victorianism. D. Realism. Answer. C. Victorianism. Question 84. In which literary movement did writers like Charles Dickens and Leo Tolstoy seek to depict life as it is, often focusing on the struggles of the working class and the impact of societal changes? A. Romanticism. B. Enlightenment. C. Victorianism. D. Realism. Answer. D. Realism. Question 85. Which literary movement, associated with the early 20th century, involved writers who challenged traditional narrative structures, embraced experimentation, and often portrayed the fragmentation of modern life? A. Romanticism. B. Enlightenment. C. Modernism. D. Realism. Answer. C. Modernism. Question 86. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, emphasized the experiences and perspectives of African Americans, addressing issues of racial inequality and celebrating Black culture? A. Harlem Renaissance. B. Black Arts Movement. C. Beat Generation. D. Postmodernism. Answer. B. Black Arts Movement. Question 87. In which literary movement did writers like Salman Rushdie and Gabriel Garcia Marquez incorporate magical elements into their works while addressing social and political issues? A. Magical realism. B. Postcolonialism. C. Black Arts Movement. D. New Formalism. Answer. A. Magical realism. Question 88. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involved poets who embraced colloquial language, narrative clarity, and a focus on everyday life? A. Language poetry. B. Slam poetry. C. New Formalism. D. Black Arts Movement. Answer. B. Slam poetry. Question 89. In which literary movement did authors like Jhumpa Lahiri and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie explore the experiences of immigrants, diaspora, and cultural identity? A. Postcolonialism. B. Magical realism. C. Diaspora literature. D. New Formalism. Answer. C. Diaspora literature. Question 90. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th and early 21st centuries, involves a focus on the digital age, the internet, and the impact of technology on human experiences? A. Cyberpunk. B. Postmodernism. C. Digital literature. D. New sincerity. Answer. C. Digital literature. Question 91. In which literary movement did authors like David Foster Wallace and Dave Eggers embrace sincerity, authenticity, and a rejection of irony in response to postmodernism? A. New sincerity. B. Cyberpunk. C. Digital literature. D. Postcolonialism. Answer. A. New sincerity. Question 92. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involved a focus on the use of science and technology in storytelling, often exploring futuristic and dystopian themes? A. Cyberpunk. B. New sincerity. C. Postcolonialism. D. Digital literature. Answer. A. Cyberpunk. Question 93. In which literary movement did authors like Zadie Smith and Jonathan Safran Foer explore the interconnectedness of characters and stories, often reflecting the globalization of the modern world? A. Global fiction. B. New sincerity. C. Postcolonialism. D. Cyberpunk. Answer. A. Global fiction. Question 94. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involved a focus on the experiences and perspectives of LGBTQ+ individuals, often challenging societal norms and advocating for inclusivity? A. Queer literature. B. New sincerity. C. Cyberpunk. D. Magical realism. Answer. A. Queer literature. Question 95. In which literary movement did authors like Junot Diaz and Jhumpa Lahiri explore the experiences of immigrants from Latin America, often incorporating bilingualism and cultural hybridity? A. Latinx literature. B. Queer literature. C. Postcolonialism. D. New sincerity. Answer. A. Latinx literature. Question 96. In which literary movement did authors like Neil Gaiman and Haruki Murakami blend elements of fantasy and reality, often creating worlds where magical and mundane coexist seamlessly? A. Slipstream. B. New Weird. C. Transrealism. D. Cyberpunk. Answer: A. Slipstream. Question 97. Which literary movement, associated with the 21st century, involves a focus on environmental themes, ecological awareness, and the impact of humans on the natural world? A. Ecofiction. B. Cli-fi climate fiction. C. Digital literature. D. New sincerity. Answer: B. Cli-fi climate fiction. Question 98. In which literary movement did authors like David Mitchell and Cloud Atlas explore interconnected narratives, nonlinear storytelling, and the impact of choices across time? A. Slipstream. B. New sincerity. C. Transrealism. D. New historicism. Answer: C. Transrealism. Question 99. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involves a blend of science fiction and fantasy elements with a focus on the bizarre and the unexplainable? A. New Weird. B. Cyberpunk. C. Slipstream. D. Ecofiction. Answer: A. New Weird. Question 100. In which literary movement did authors like Jeff Vandermeer and China Miéville embrace a fusion of speculative fiction, often challenging traditional genre boundaries? A. New Weird. B. Cli-fi climate fiction. C. Slipstream. D. Transrealism. Answer: A. New Weird. Question 101. Which literary movement, associated with the 21st century, involves a focus on the experiences and voices of indigenous peoples, often addressing issues of identity, culture, and colonization? A. Indigenous literature. B. Neo-Romanticism. C. Cli-fi climate fiction. D. Slipstream. Answer: A. Indigenous literature. Question 102. In which literary movement did authors like Elena Ferranti and Karl Ove Nosgard explore deeply personal and autobiographical narratives, blurring the lines between fiction and reality? A. Autofiction. B. Indigenous literature. C. Neo-Romanticism. D. New Weird. Answer: A. Autofiction. Question 103. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involves writers who focus on exploring and representing the experiences of those living on the margins of society? A. Neo-Romanticism. B. Dirty realism. C. Cli-fi climate fiction. D. New Weird. Answer: B. Dirty realism. Question 104. In which literary movement did authors like David Wong and Chuck Palahniuk explore themes of nihilism, existentialism, and societal alienation? A. Neo-Romanticism. B. Dirty realism. C. Transgressive fiction. D. Cli-fi climate fiction. Answer: C. Transgressive fiction. Question 105. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involves works that challenge and subvert traditional gender norms, often focusing on gender identity and sexual orientation? A. Queer literature. B. Neo-Romanticism. C. Dirty realism. D. Autofiction. Answer: A. Queer literature. Question 106. In which literary movement did authors like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Isabel Allende use magical realism to explore social and political issues, often incorporating elements of Latin American history and culture? A. Postcolonialism. B. Magical realism. C. Global fiction. D. Latinx literature. Answer: B. Magical realism. Question 107. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, involved writers from various parts of the world who expressed a sense of cultural dislocation and explored themes of identity and exile? A. Diaspora literature. B. Global fiction. C. Transnationalism. D. World literature. Answer: A. Diaspora literature. Question 108. In which literary movement did authors like Haruki Murakami and Orhan Pamuk explore themes of cultural identity and the clash between tradition and modernity in the context of their respective societies? A. Global fiction. B. Postcolonialism. C. World literature. D. Transrealism. Answer: C. World literature. Question 109. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th and early 21st centuries, involves works that transcend national boundaries, reflecting a global perspective and addressing universal themes? A. Transnationalism. B. World literature. C. Diaspora literature. D. Global fiction. Answer: B. World literature. Question 110. In which literary movement did authors like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Salman Rushdie explore the intersection of different cultures, often addressing issues of postcolonial identity and globalization? A. Postcolonialism. B. Transnationalism. C. Diaspora literature. D. Global fiction. Answer: B. Transnationalism. Question 111. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, involved writers from various parts of Africa who sought to address the cultural and political complexities of postcolonial societies? A. Afrofuturism. B. Negritude. C. Diaspora literature. D. Transnationalism. Answer: B. Negritude. Question 112. In which literary movement did authors like Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka explore the impact of colonialism, cultural identity, and the complexities of postcolonial African societies? A. Postcolonialism. B. Afrofuturism. C. Negritude. D. Diaspora literature. Answer: A. Postcolonialism. Question 113. Which literary movement, associated with the early 20th century, involved writers like Rabindranath Tagore and Liu Xun who sought to create a distinct literary identity for their respective nations, India and China? A. Postcolonialism. B. Global fiction. C. Third world literature. D. Nationalism. Answer: D. Nationalism. Question 114. In which literary movement did authors like Yukio Mishima and Kenzaburo O explore themes of cultural identity, modernization, and the impact of World War II on Japanese society? A. Postcolonialism. B. Global fiction. C. Japanese modernism. D. Transnationalism. Answer: C. Japanese modernism. Question 115. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involves works that address the experiences of indigenous peoples from around the world, often reflecting on issues of colonialism and cultural preservation? A. Indigenous literature. B. Global fiction. C. Transnationalism. D. Diaspora literature. Answer: A. Indigenous literature. Question 116. In which literary movement did writers like Rabindranath Tagore and Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay explore themes of nationalism, cultural identity, and the social issues of colonial India? A. Bengal Renaissance. B. Modernism. C. Dalit literature. D. Indian Romanticism. Answer: A. Bengal Renaissance. Question 117. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, involved writers like Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao, and R.K. Narayan who explored the social and cultural changes in postcolonial India? A. Indian Romanticism. B. Progressive Writers Movement. C. Bombay Progressive Artists Group. D. New Wave Literature. Answer: B. Progressive Writers Movement. Question 118. In which literary movement did authors like Salman Rushdie and Arundhati Roy explore the complexities of modern India, addressing issues such as globalization, multiculturalism, and social change? A. Indian Romanticism. B. Postcolonialism. C. New Wave Literature. D. Contemporary Indian Literature. Answer: D. Contemporary Indian Literature. Question 119. Which literary movement, associated with the late 20th century, involved writers like Mahasweta Devi and Bama who focused on the experiences of marginalized and oppressed communities, particularly Dalits and tribal populations? A. Dalit literature. B. Indian Romanticism. C. Contemporary Indian literature. D. Progressive Writers Movement. Answer: A. Dalit literature. Question 120. In which literary movement did authors like Amitav Ghosh and Vikram Seth explore historical narratives, cultural intersections, and the impact of globalization on India? A. Indian Romanticism. B. New Wave Literature. C. Contemporary Indian Literature. D. Postcolonialism. Answer: C. Contemporary Indian Literature. Question 121. In which literary movement did poets like Agha Shahid Ali and Kamala Das explore themes of cultural identity, love, and the personal in their poetry, often blending traditional forms with contemporary expressions? A. Bhakti movement. B. Indian English poetry. C. Neo-Romanticism. D. Contemporary Indian poetry. Answer. D. Contemporary Indian poetry. Question 122. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, involved a group of writers known as the Kannada Navya, who introduced modernist and experimental techniques to Kannada literature? A. Navya movement. B. Indian English poetry. C. Bhakti movement. D. New Wave literature. Answer. A. Navya movement. Question 123. In which literary movement did writers like Premchand and Bhisham Sahni focus on realistic portrayals of rural life, social issues, and the struggles of common people in Hindi literature? A. Navya movement. B. Bhakti movement. C. Indian English fiction. D. Progressive writers movement. Answer. D. Progressive writers movement. Question 124. Which literary movement, associated with the 19th century, involved poets like Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay who sought to revive classical Sanskrit literature and express Indian nationalism through literature? A. Bengal Renaissance. B. Bhakti movement. C. Indian Romanticism. D. Navya movement. Answer. A. Bengal Renaissance. Question 125. In which literary movement did poets like Keki N. Daruwala and Agha Shahid Ali explore the themes of loss, displacement, and cultural identity, often drawing inspiration from history and mythology? A. Indian English poetry. B. Contemporary Indian poetry. C. Bhakti movement. D. Navya movement. Answer. A. Indian English poetry. Question 126. Which literary movement, associated with the mid-20th century, involved writers like Jorge Luis Borges and Julio Cortázar who experimented with narrative structure, language, and reality, often blurring the boundaries between fiction and reality? A. Magical realism. B. Postmodernism. C. Surrealism. D. Absurdism. Answer. B. Postmodernism. Question 127. In which literary movement did authors like Milan Kundera and Salman Rushdie explore the interplay of history, memory, and personal narratives, often questioning the nature of storytelling itself? A. Postcolonialism. B. Postmodernism. C. Metafiction. D. Transcendentalism. Answer. C. Metafiction. Question 128. Which literary movement, associated with the late 19th and early 20th centuries, involved poets like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound who sought to break away from traditional forms and experiment with language and symbolism? A. Symbolism. B. Imagism. C. Modernism. D. Postmodernism. Answer. C. Modernism. Question 129. In which literary movement did authors like Samuel Beckett and Albert Camus explore the absurdity of human existence, often depicting characters in situations devoid of traditional meaning and purpose? A. Existentialism. B. Absurdism. C. Postmodernism. D. Surrealism. Answer. B. Absurdism. Question 130. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, involved poets like Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs who rejected traditional societal norms and experimented with language and form? A. Beat Generation. B. Surrealism. C. Postmodernism. D. Absurdism. Answer. A. Beat Generation. Question 131. In which literary movement did writers like Italo Calvino and Jorge Luis Borges explore the idea of literature as a game, often incorporating metafictional elements and complex narrative structures? A. Oulipo. B. Metafiction. C. Neo-realism. D. Language poetry. Answer. A. Oulipo. Question 132. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, involved poets who embraced the idea of language as the primary material of poetry, often challenging conventional grammar and syntax? A. Oulipo. B. Language poetry. C. Concrete poetry. D. Transcendentalism. Answer. B. Language poetry. Question 133. In which literary movement did poets like E. Cummings and Gertrude Stein experiment with language, form, and syntax, often challenging traditional grammatical structures? A. Oulipo. B. Language poetry. C. Concrete poetry. D. Futurism. Answer. C. Concrete poetry. Question 134. Which literary movement, associated with the 20th century, involved poets who embraced randomness, chance, and unconventional methods in their creative process, often incorporating elements of collage and fragmentation? A. Surrealism. B. Dadaism. C. Oulipo. D. Language poetry. Answer. B. Dadaism. Question 135. In which literary movement did writers like William S. Burroughs and Kathy Acker explore the concept of the cut-up technique, involving the rearrangement of words and phrases to create new meanings? A. Dadaism. B. Oulipo. C. Surrealism. D. Beat generation. Answer. D. Beat generation. Question 136. In which year did the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural and artistic movement celebrating African American culture, reach its peak, contributing significantly to the flourishing of Black literature, music, and art? A. 1919. B. 1925. C. 1932. D. 1941. Answer. B. 1925. Question 137. In the year 1954, a literary movement called the Angry Young Men emerged in British literature, expressing disillusionment with post-World War II society. Who among the following authors was associated with this movement? A. Kingsley Amis. B. Graham Greene. C. Yves Lenoir. D. George Orwell. Answer. A. Kingsley Amis. Question 138. In which decade did the Beat generation, characterized by writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, rebel against societal norms, explore the experiences of the beatniks, and reject materialism? A. 1940s. B. 1950s. C. 1960s. D. 1970s. Answer. B. 1950s. Question 139. The Imagist movement, emphasizing clarity, precision, and the use of free verse, emerged in the early 20th century. In which year did the Imagist Manifesto appear, outlining the principles of this movement? A. 1912. B. 1920. C. 1925. D. 1930. Answer. A. 1912. Question 140. In the year 1967, a literary movement known as magical realism gained prominence. Which Latin American author, associated with this movement, wrote the novel 100 Years of Solitude? A. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. B. Isabel Allende. C. Julio Cortázar. D. Mario Vargas Llosa. Answer. A. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Question 141. The Bloomsbury Group, an influential literary and artistic movement, was active in the early 20th century. Which writer and essayist, known for works like Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse, was associated with the Bloomsbury Group? A. E. M. Forster. B. Virginia Woolf. C. D. H. Lawrence. D. T. S. Eliot. Answer. B. Virginia Woolf. Question 142. The Lost Generation refers to a group of American writers who came of age during World War I. Which novelist, known for works like The Great Gatsby, is often considered a prominent figure of the Lost Generation? A. F. Scott Fitzgerald. B. Ernest Hemingway. C. Sinclair Lewis. D. William Faulkner. Answer. A. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Question 143. In the 1960s and 1970s, a literary movement called postcolonialism emerged, focusing on the experiences of formerly colonized nations. Which Nigerian author, known for Things Fall Apart, is often associated with this movement? A. Chinua Achebe. B. Wole Soyinka. C. Ngugi wa Thiong'o. D. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Answer. A. Chinua Achebe. Question 144. The Transcendentalist movement, emphasizing the inherent goodness of people and nature, was prominent in the 19th century. Which essayist, poet, and philosopher, known for works like Nature and Self-Reliance, was a key figure in Transcendentalism? A. Nathaniel Hawthorne. B. Ralph Waldo Emerson. C. Henry David Thoreau. D. Walt Whitman. Answer: B. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Question 145. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the decadent movement emerged, characterized by a rejection of societal norms and an embrace of sensual pleasure. Which Irish author, known for The Picture of Dorian Gray, was associated with decadence? A. James Joyce. B. W.B. Yeats. C. Oscar Wilde. D. George Bernard Shaw. Answer: C. Oscar Wilde. Question 146. The Southern Gothic literary movement, known for its use of macabre and grotesque elements, was prominent in the 20th century. Which American author, known for works like A Good Man is Hard to Find, is often associated with Southern Gothic literature? A. William Faulkner. B. Flannery O'Connor. C. Eudora Welty. D. Carson McCullers. Answer: B. Flannery O'Connor. Question 147. In the mid-20th century, the Black Arts movement emerged as a cultural and artistic movement among African American artists. Which poet and playwright, known for works like The Dutchman and Black Arts, was a key figure in this movement? A. Langston Hughes. B. Amiri Baraka Leroy Jones. C. Gwendolyn Brooks. D. Nikki Giovanni. Answer: B. Amiri Baraka Leroy Jones. Question 148. The Southern Renaissance refers to a literary movement in the American South during the early 20th century. Which author, known for the novel Look Homeward, Angel, is often associated with the Southern Renaissance? A. Carson McCullers. B. Thomas Wolfe. C. William Faulkner. D. Eudora Welty. Answer: B. Thomas Wolfe. Question 149. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Brat Pack literary movement emerged, featuring a group of young writers. Which author, known for works like Less Than Zero and American Psycho, was associated with the Brat Pack? A. Bret Easton Ellis. B. Jay McInerney. C. Donna Tartt. D. Tama Janowitz. Answer: A. Bret Easton Ellis. Question 150. The Harlem Renaissance was a cultural and artistic movement in the 1920s, celebrating African American culture. Which poet, known for works like The Negro Speaks of Rivers, was a prominent figure of the Harlem Renaissance? A. Claude McKay. B. Langston Hughes. C. Zora Neale Hurston. D. Count T. Cullen. Answer: B. Langston Hughes.